it's always interesting when you have a new leader come into power.
Mm-hmm.
They always think they can do better than the previous guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and especially if that person is younger, they think the older guy doesn't know what he's talking about. You know, younger people are more arrogant. They think they know better, they know more than the older guy, right?
Right.
And this is a bit like Zelensky and Poroshenko. But as I've already mentioned, the Zelensky came face to face with the same exact problems as Poroshenko. And so there's been no progress really. And the reasons are, because Russia continues to basically argue that Ukraine is not a real country, that Ukrainians don't exist, that Ukrainians and Russians are один народ, one people. This is Putin always says this. So that already is an obstacle, already a problem. Because that means that Ukraine has no right to decide where it wants to go. Ukraine's foreign policy is already decided by Russia. It should be part of the Russian world, Ruski Mir.
Right.
So that already creates a problem because NATO and EU integration are in the Ukrainian constitution. That's pretty impossible to change.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, the fundamental question of what steps do you take to achieve peace? And that problem of which steps you take first has not changed. And so Zelensky basically repeats the same steps as Poroshenko, which is what Western governments support also, that you need to take political steps after you've taken security steps. So first of all, you need to have demilitarization of the Donbas. That's the term they always use. Now this is because you can't have, for example, free elections if you have militarization. If you have, you know, paramilitary groups with arms walking around, they will not be a free election. Russia says, no, we have elections first and then demilitarization. That will never be agreed to by Ukrainian government. But the problem is more even deeper. I grew up in Britain, and I remember the problem of Northern Ireland, the terrorism, which only ended in the late 1990s with the peace agreement. In Northern Ireland, you had about 3,000 terrorists, okay, Protestant and Catholic terrorists. And this was a very big problem to demilitarize. 3,000 people. But they are not armed very heavily. I mean, they are armed with mainly machine guns, not with, you know, tanks or big aircraft or anything. In the Donbas, when you talk about demilitarization, you're talking about demilitarizing 35,000 troops. This is what Russia has created. Russia has created two corps, two big brigades for Donetsk and for Luhansk. Together 35,000 plus 5,000 to 10,000 Russians. Now, Russia always keeps saying, we are not present in the Donbas. We are not there. Well, how do you have, you know, when Ukrainian leaders then say, we want demilitarization and withdrawal of foreign forces, how can you have the withdrawal of foreign forces that the foreign government says they're not there? They don't exist. And also these 35,000 troops, they're not like in Northern Ireland, just AK-47s. They have massive big weapons, tanks, armored personnel carriers, surface-to-air missiles. They have drones. They have all sorts of things. This is a major, major task to demilitarize, which cannot even be done in a few months. You're talking years to demilitarize this, if it's even possible. And I'm quite skeptical. Because what does it mean? What, Russia will take back all this military equipment? What will happen? I mean, the other difficulty is, okay, we demilitarize, and then these 35,000 people, what do they do? Where do they go? They will not go to Russia, they will probably stay. So will they become policemen or I don't know, government officials? And also the 5,000 or 10,000 Russians who are operating there, what will they do? They could pretend that they are local people. So the difficulties that have been created by Moscow in this Donbas conflict make it extremely difficult to resolve. Even when you have somebody like Zelensky, who is, he says, I promised to do this in my election campaign and I will try. I think where we have also the difficulty is that Russian leaders don't understand the concept of compromise, and they could have tried to do a deal with Zelensky when he first was elected, but they didn't. They actually insulted him. And he was elected in April 2019, and in the same month, Russia announced they were going to begin issuing passports to residents of Donetsk and Luhansk. So like they did in Georgia, for example. So this was like a slap in the face for Zelensky. Even though he came as a very moderate type of leader who said, I want to do a deal and everything else. And so he is finding it very difficult to do deals. We also have to remember that, and that is true of all of these conflicts, including Nagorno-Karabakh, that once you have bloodshed, once you have people who have died, either from massacres or from war, it's very difficult to do deals because people don't say, no, we don't want to have deals. We are angry about this. I think that I was always very pessimistic that something would change in the Donbass on this question. And even though, as I say, Zelensky has tried, so you have to credit him with trying. He's a moderate. In this sense, I wrote a similarity between Aliyev, Ivanishvili in Georgia, and Zelensky. These are all centrist type politicians. But I think what makes Ukraine even more complicated than Moldova, Georgia, or Azerbaijan is because of this Russian-Ukrainian relationship. What has happened in Russia is that the type of nationalism that has emerged after 20 years of Vladimir Putin in power has been influenced very much by emigre Russians, these Belogvardiцы, white guardists from Tsarist times and from the revolution. That kind of ideologies and their writings and their beliefs, and they always believed in the so-called pan-Russian nation, pan-Russian people. And pan-Russian people is a Ruski narod, a Russian people composed of three branches: Russians, Ukrainian, Belarusians. And so this is what has taken place, is that this is a worse relationship to Ukraine than was in the Soviet Union. And I'm saying this as an anti-communist. I don't like the Soviet Union. But in the Soviet Union, Soviet policy was Ukrainians and Russians are very close, but they are different.
Yeah.
Now the policy is Ukrainians and Russians are one people. So, and even if you are a Russian-speaking Ukrainian, you cannot accept this. So all of these factors make it extremely difficult to see how this can be resolved. I mean, the more the conflict goes on, the greater the increase in number of veterans from the war also. Now you have about 15% of Ukrainian voters are veterans from the war in the Donbas, or families of veterans. And these are usually radical people. These are people who have been radicalized by war, or they have their brothers or friends have been killed. And that number will continue to grow as the war goes on. And that also makes it very difficult to reach an agreement and compromise, because every time, say, President Zelensky tries to do a deal, these veterans say, watch out, be careful, don't betray us. So again, I'm not very optimistic about this, but and Russia knows, again, what Russia knows about Ukraine is that Ukraine has a very strong military industrial complex and army. In 2014, it was quite weak because of corruption and Yanukovych and infiltration of Ukrainian military forces by Russian agents. But today, Ukraine has a very strong army. So Russia has to be very careful that, because I think if it came to a hot war, like what happened in Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh, Ukrainian forces could very easily defeat the separatist forces in Donbas. There's simply no question. Ukraine's armies and security forces are too big. In 2014, Ukraine was about to defeat them, and that led to Russia's invasion in August of 14. That's why Russia has to keep all these. Russia keeps about 80,000 troops on the Ukrainian border as a kind of security guarantee. This makes it different to Armenia, Azerbaijan, because Armenia wrongly believed Russia would intervene, not realizing that this so-called collective security treaty organization only applied to sovereign Armenian territory, not to territories of Azerbaijan. Armenia was occupied.
Exactly.
And so Russia did not intervene, and I think that, plus I think Armenia's arrogance. I don't think it ever treated. I don't think Armenia ever looked upon Azerbaijan as a serious military power, and they were surprised and shocked what happened. Therefore, in this very short, quick period of time, they had become kind of complacent, very laid back. Well, this is where there is a similarity to the Ukrainian-Russian relationship, because here Russians and Armenians are the same. They both have this arrogant looking at, in the Armenian case, Azerbaijan, and in the Ukrainian case, Russia looking at Ukrainians. Russians never expected Ukrainians to fight in 2014. And because who are these Ukrainians? These are peasants, these are Ruski, these are Russians, they will all greet Russian troops who are coming. And the only people who will fight will be West Ukrainians. So this kind of condescending, patronistic attitude, looking down, was the same as Russians on Ukrainians and Armenians and Azerbaijanis. And I think in both cases they were surprised and shocked, because actually the greatest number of people fighting in Donbas are East Ukrainians. I know this. I've been 5 times to the war zone, and the highest rate of casualties for Ukrainian Siloviki, Ukrainian security forces, are from Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, not from West Ukraine. So because if you are living in one of those regions bordering the war, for you the war is very close. And you want to fight because this is your land, your area, your region. This is what Russia cannot understand about these Russian-speaking Ukrainians. These are patriots of Ukraine, and they are fighting for Ukraine. But they kind of dismissed Ukrainians as not serious soldiers. In the Ukrainian-Russian case, this was surprising because in the Soviet army, Ukrainians were always regarded as very good soldiers. Many Ukrainians were in the middle officer corps. In the Soviet army, the senior top levels were Russians, but in the medium level, like lieutenant and colonel, were many Ukrainians. Mm-hmm. And the sergeants were always Ukrainians. So Ukrainians were good soldiers.